2023 was indeed a nightmare for Ukraine, and 2024 is looking no better. So 2023, of course, started out with all kinds of optimism from NATO and the collective West, the United States at the lead, talking about how Russia's impending defeat at the hands of Ukraine's military was going to occur in a magnificent counteroffensive that would launch at any point. And then we got months and months and literally months. We got nearly 6 months of hype about a coming counteroffensive that NATO, the United States, were preparing Ukraine for, and that this was going to be the straw that broke the Russian camel's back. Well, we are now at the end of 2023, entering 2024, and the United States is now in a completely different position. The Biden administration says Politico is quietly shifting its strategy in Ukraine. For 2 years, Biden and Zelensky have focused on driving Russia from Ukraine. Now Washington is discussing a move to a more defensive posture. All that means is that Ukraine has lost. Ukraine has not achieved any of its objectives that the US and NATO attempted to arm it to the teeth to achieve, and that Ukraine has lost. So, with US and European aid to Ukraine now in serious jeopardy, the Biden administration and European officials are quietly shifting their focus from supporting Ukraine's goals of total victory over Russia to improving its position in an eventual negotiation to end the war, according to a Biden administration official and a European diplomat based in Washington. Such a negotiation would likely mean giving up parts of Ukraine to Russia. The White House and Pentagon publicly insist there's no official change to administration policy, that they still support Ukraine's aim of forcing Russia's military completely out of the country. But along with the Ukrainians themselves, U.S. and European officials are now discussing the redeployment of Kiev's forces away from Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky's mostly failed counteroffensive into a stronger defensive position against Russian forces in the east, according to the administration official and the European diplomat, and confirmed by a senior administration official. Essentially, a lot of anonymous officials, usually meaning intelligence, usually meaning those who have an inside scoop. And when it comes to, usually when I see this, I say, okay, well, we should be suspicious. But when it comes to projects that are within the purview of their agenda and their strategic military and intelligence strategy, when it comes to points, talking points, positions, political situations that are very much in the purview of intelligence and of the so-called anonymous officials, I think we should believe them when it comes to Ukraine. This effort has also involved bolstering air defense systems and building fortifications, razor wire obstructions, and anti-tank obstacles and ditches along Ukraine's northern border with Belarus. In addition, the Biden administration is focused on rapidly resurrecting Ukraine's own defense industry to supply desperately needed weapons that U.S. Congress is balking at replacing. So that's what Politico is saying, that the strategy is now pull back, withdraw, go on the defensive, prolong the conflict without any prospect of victory. That is a very different position than what Ukraine was touted to be in just at the beginning of 2023. So essentially, we've seen a complete 180 here. And this can be even spelled out in simpler terms. So Kit Clarenberg of the Gray Zone posted this on Twitter, and I think it is a really interesting summation. So Richard Kemp, he's a retired UK Royal Navy admiral, I believe. I believe he was very high up. Mr. Kemp, he has been writing he was a colonel. So he was a colonel. He's a British Army officer. So he was a retired British Army officer, and he's been writing a lot in the Financial Times about Ukraine. And so here you can see, let me see actually if I can zoom in on this a bit. Here you can see how the headlines from February 2023 to December 2023 have changed quite a bit. So in February 2023, a total Russian collapse is surprisingly close because Ukraine can retake Crimea and bring about the total implosion of Putin's forces, but only with our support, essentially saying that victory is actually within reach for Ukraine. And then Putin is terrified of Ukraine's counteroffensive back in May, right before it began. And of course, February to May, that's over 3 months of hype now before it started. Airstrikes on Kiev were an attempt to undermine morale. Instead, they have strengthened it. July 3rd, 2023, Russia's time has almost run out. This is during Ukraine's counteroffensive. Ukraine's offensive disappoints, but the Kremlin strategy of wearing down Kiev is no longer tenable. So here you see the spin in the headlines here that this is a disappointing counteroffensive, but it is no longer tenable for Russia to wear down Ukraine. But if we look at this, it says Ukraine's offensive disappoints. So already they were talking about this being a disappointment in July 2023, the counteroffensive. And then what happened? 90,000 Ukrainians died, a huge percentage, 30, 40 plus percent of all of Ukraine's weaponry wiped out in a matter of months. And of course, now the desperation has set in deeply. Ukraine is losing on December 28, 2023, but the UK must stand by it. So Ukraine is losing now, facing wars in Europe and the Middle East. Does the West have the will to back the right side? So Kate Clareberg said, that's a farce in 4 acts. And the most infamous, I think, image of what 2023 represented for Ukraine was summarized by Max Blumenthal, editor-in-chief of the Gray Zone. Zelensky heeded NATO's demand to break negotiation and dispatch masses of Ukrainian men onto a killing field to satisfy neocon fever dreams of bludgeoning and balkanizing Russia into oblivion. But in Vilnius, this was the NATO summit in Lithuania, back in the summer of 2023, all he got was a pat on the back and some lousy cluster bombs. You're stuck with us, Biden told him after rejecting his application to the club. Sad. And so this is the image that shook the world. Of course, he didn't have a mop, literally, but the mop has been added for good effect because essentially what he's doing is the dirty work of NATO and the United States, and he was rejected. He was not spoken to. He went there in his army fatigues, and he was essentially shunned by the very people who propped him up to fight this war. There is no image that says defeat bigger than this one. This is the image that summarizes Ukraine's destruction at the hands of NATO. And this ultimately summarizes and puts a highlight on how Zelensky now entering 2024 is a marked man. There is no guarantee that Zelensky will make it out of 2024 as the leader of Ukraine, as the president of Ukraine, whether it's by election or by being taken out or whisked away or escape, run away, whatever he's got to do. He does not have a lot of time because the rumors, the rumblings, and the growing evidence of a possible coup or some kind of power shift is going to occur soon. So Ukraine has had a terrible year because the United States and NATO wanted to keep Ukraine in the fight, wanted to destroy Ukraine in order to fight Russia. And that ended in failure. So really, Ukraine's failure is the US and NATO's failure. They have sacrificed everything. They've demilitarized themselves. And they still have China supposedly to worry about. This is what they claim, that they need to contain China and they need to build up against China. Now they're stuck in another conflict in West Asia due to Israel's unhinged onslaught in Gaza, threatening regional war. The Red Sea is on fire because Yemen is taking a heroic stand for the people of Gaza, the Palestinian people. So the United States has a lot of problems, and Ukraine is its biggest one right now because Ukraine was supposed to be the domino that led to the ultimate collapse of Russia. And it has been far from that. That is not how this game of dominoes ended up. In fact, it's been the exact opposite. So now I'm going to play friend of the show, Scott Ritter, a frequent guest. You can follow him at scottritterextra.com. He is in Moscow at the moment. So I'm going to play a 2-minute topic that he just did, summarizing, I think, quite well the bad year for Ukraine, hitting on these points. I think it's quite important to hear this summary because it goes over everything. And then I'm going to get into how Ukraine's bad year has actually been a geopolitical nightmare of broad proportions for the United States and its hegemonic ambition. So here we go.
This has not been a good year. Ukraine in crisis. This has not been a good year for Ukraine. It started off with the much hyped counteroffensive, where Ukraine was provided tens of billions of dollars of modern NATO equipment and given training on this equipment and assisted in planning military operations designed to break the Russian defenses, split the Russian defenses, sever the land bridge connecting Crimea with the main part of Russia. None of that happened. The Russian defenses held, and the Ukrainian forces, which had been so carefully assembled, were destroyed on the battlefield. Now Ukraine finds itself in a situation where it is not only facing continued military defeat on the battlefield, but they're losing support of the very nations whose support they need to continue the fight. The European Union has grown weary of the Ukraine conflict, questioning the need to expend tens of billions of euros in support of what appears to be a losing. The United States Congress is mired in domestic political intrigue, where you continued Ukrainian funding and held hostage to domestic issues such as border security of on the southern border with Mexico. Right now, Ukraine is starving in terms of resources. They aren't getting new equipment. They're not getting the money necessary to continue funding government operations, and they've run out of manpower. Ukraine is right now in the midst of an emergency 500,000 strong mobilization that includes women, old men, disabled people, and frankly speaking, people that don't want to fight and die for Ukraine. 2023 was not a good year for Ukraine. It was, however, a good year for Russia. Russia has gone over from the defensive to the offensive. They recently have captured Mariinka, a city where Ukraine used heavily fortified positions as a base to shell innocent civilians in the Donbass. They won't be able to do that anymore. Russia is on the verge of capturing Advika, another heavily fortified town, and so on and so forth, up and down the line of contact. The Russian forces have gone over the offensive. These Russian forces are well equipped, well led, and there doesn't seem to be any end to them, as over 1,500 Russians are volunteering to serve in the special military operation every day. 2024 looks to be even worse for Ukraine, with the potential of strategic defeat. 2024 will be a good year for Russia. This has been my 2-minute topic. Remember.
So there you have it. That about summarizes it all. But it's important to know what Scott mentioned there that I was not able to know, which is that Russia has been making gains on the battlefield, real gains. Mariinka, Avdiivka is increasingly becoming surrounded. So even on the front line, even if it is slow, it's a war of attrition, Russia still has the initiative, and it's looking like that increasingly. And this missile attack that occurred on December 29th, this barrage, this assault, is absolutely an indication that Russia has a lot more firepower. This is not something that Ukraine can do. Ukraine can go over the border 40, 50, 60 kilometers and kill Russians because it just has that thirst to do so and still has some weaponry to do so. But what Russia did on December 29th was a strategic military operation, one that is massively effective. It has been massively effective over the course of this conflict. Russia has degraded Ukraine's military once, twice, 3 times over, and it's about to be a fourth. And this one is probably the final one. As Scott mentioned, there is nothing left for the United States and NATO to give. They are indicating, they are telling Zelensky, they are telling Ukraine, they're telling everybody, they're telling the Western public and the collective West that there's nothing left, that this war is over. You have Politico reporting that the United States is trying to seek an exit ramp of some kind and to force a negotiated settlement. Now, Russia has no reason to do any of this, and that is why I believe this conflict will continue for quite some time. And the ramifications of the bad year for Ukraine and the good year for Russia is enormous. They are enormous. It's not just that Russia is winning on the battlefield and that it is much more equipped than Ukraine, that it has essentially demilitarized NATO and the United States and has found itself in probably the most favorable position you could be given the balance of forces in the world. But the ramifications are even bigger. They're bigger for the economic situation around the world, the geopolitical situation around the world have all been changed dramatically because of this conflict. Ukraine's bad year has opened up the floodgates for the entirety of those outside of the collective West, what's known sometimes as the global South, to move away from the United States, to move away from NATO, to move away from their economic reliance on the dollar, to move toward a multipolar world. That is what Ukraine has taught much of the world. It has even taught staunch allies of the United States and of NATO proper, such as Saudi Arabia. This is a country, Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which has done its utmost to be loyal, at least up until the Biden administration, to the United States in much, or if not all, of its prior ventures. Now, that relationship is strained, and even Saudi Arabia has championed BRICS, has joined BRICS, has normalized with Iran, brokered by China, and has been very keen on building stronger relations with Russia. The entirety of West Asia has looked at Ukraine as a possible crystal ball for what could happen to countries, even the Saudi Arabias, the UAEs of the world. What could happen to them if they end up on the United States' bad side? So this has changed the world in such a dramatic fashion. Russia's rise on the world stage is now not only inevitable, but it has been cemented. Russia can now go down in the history books as the country that demilitarized NATO, that defeated Western sanctions in the biggest way, not just being able to survive. Many countries have done that. Iran has done that. Little Eritrea, which we cannot negate as significant on the African continent, Zimbabwe. These countries have survived. Venezuela, they've survived. Sometimes they've done better than survive. But Russia has actually defeated them, meaning that Russia is better off than it was before the sanctions. Few countries can say that. And so that has grown Russia's prestige, its leadership in the world by many, many, many folds. Russia is now not just a rising power, but it is a global power in the world. The history books will look at Russia and say, at least those that are written not by the hegemonic victors, or we should say losers at this point, but by the people who have become victorious over them. Those who are sober in their analysis will say Russia defeated the empire. Russia defeated the United States and NATO in 2023. So Russia's good year, Russia's good 2023 was in fact even more momentous than what than even what Scott said. And Scott was very sober in his analysis there. But yes, it's even bigger than this. Russia will lead BRICS in 2024. We're going to see possibly another 10 countries join that alliance. We're going to see Russia and China and those countries in BRICS and other multilateral organizations continue to build alternatives to the US dollar, build alternatives to US economic strangulation and sanctions, we're going to see Russia continue to consolidate politically to the point where we know Vladimir Putin is running in for president, is a shoo-in, but we're going to see Russia's political trajectory continue to move toward a multipolar centric way of leadership globally, but also it will have huge ramifications for Russia domestically, as we have seen with its reorienting of the economy during this sanctions regime by the West. Russia is now focusing on developing itself and becoming more self-reliant. That is going to continue. And when a country that big is increasingly self-reliant, it opens up opportunities for more countries around the world to do the same. That is why Russia and China are such an important partnership. The $200 billion relationship between Russia and China is massive and huge. But at the same time, China and Vietnam's relationship is nearly $200 billion in total trade volume. But we wouldn't say China and Vietnam's, well, very significant, and of course, holding a lot of political and economic weight, is as important as China and Russia's, because China and Russia are global powers. China and Russia have done what few countries have been able to do in the 21st century, which is come out of squalor, come out of warmongering and the attempt to undermine them from the hegemon, come out of that victorious. Few countries can say they can do that and do it in a way where now they are propelled to a position of global leadership. So Russia's good year, Ukraine's bad year, is just massively important for the future of the world. Really, Russia is charting a course forward that has not been seen in a century. This is what Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin said to each other. Xi Jinping, when he visited Moscow in March of 2023, he said, "We are witnessing changes not seen in a century." When Xi Jinping said that, he was talking about we haven't seen this since essentially the emergence of the Soviet Union and, of course, the world socialist bloc that ushered in the Cold War and ushered in massive changes to the entire world order, independence movements, etc. That's what he was really referring to. That's what happened a century ago. It led to world wars. It led to a complete reorienting of the world economy and the world and the way that the world was governed. This is happening again now, and the ramifications are possibly even larger because the United States and its partners in crime have a plan, or I don't know if we can call it a plan, but they have the aim to try to contain and eventually wage war against both Russia and China. But what Ukraine has shown us is that this war has failed before it started. Ukraine is a reflection of the internal rot of the U.S. Hegemonic unipolar order, that it is rotting internally. These divisions about Ukraine aid is just another example of how it is rotting internally. Its foreign policy has suffered defeat after defeat after defeat. Afghanistan being a recent one, now Ukraine, but we can go on and on even before this that would give us some indication, even Vietnam. We can go all the way back to Vietnam, to Korea, major defeats, major setbacks, even during the U.S.'s so-called golden era of hegemony. We can go on and on. None of these conflicts have led to concrete victory. And now with each defeat, with each setback that comes in subsequent conflicts, we see the retreat, we see the rot accelerate. And Ukraine really pushed on that acceleration pedal harder than ever before. Now we are seeing the United States and NATO demilitarize themselves, disarm themselves, weaken themselves, pour everything into a losing effort, show their hand as megalomaniacal warmongers with only one aim, and that's to divide up, to balkanize, to destroy the world so they can control it, so they can loot and steal and plunder and cheat and lie and enrich the tiny few. The world is sick of it and is not having it. And with the entrance of the atrocities the crimes against humanity being committed in Gaza by another U.S. proxy, Israel, we are seeing just a momentous shift of world public opinion against the United States and its NATO allies and whoever else decides to, the very small number of countries that decide to follow its lead. We are seeing a massive shift away from them, even in the collective West, whether it's from war fatigue or whether it is from outright disdain and distrust of the political system that has led them into these wars. We're going to see a crisis, a crumbling of this world order. Ukraine in 2024 is going to reflect that deeply because while the battlefield will go slow, Russia is not here to wipe Ukraine off of the map, although the demilitarization of Ukraine is going to move forward steadily and handedly. And indeed, a winter offensive is very likely. But it will be the political rot. Ukraine will crumble from the inside because the coup that established this government in 2014, the rapid militarization and buildup to a war with Russia facilitated by the US and NATO, created the conditions for Ukraine's leadership to essentially be nothing more than an instrument, a puppet of NATO's aims. And any government that is a puppet of a foreign government or entity's aims is not going to be one that lasts very long when things start to go awry. And boy, have they gone awry. This thing is over. There is nothing left for Ukraine to achieve. There is nothing left for the collective West to do but to watch their project continue to rot from the inside and out. And in 2024, we're going to see that, and we're going to see how the globe, how the world is charting a new course forward. And so, for all of the atrocities, for all of the ways in which Ukraine has exposed the cruelty and depravity of the U.S. and Kiev's U.S. and NATO backers, it has also exposed that there is more than one way to go to move forward in terms of building a world worth living in. And Russia and its allies and those in the global south are showing the way forward. And Ukraine is just going to push that development, push all of that forward. So I guess in some ways we can thank the United States, we can thank NATO, we can thank Kiev, we can thank all the forces that are trying to push through a war against Russia via this conflict. We can thank them for the processes that they are lighting a flame in. And we thus have something to celebrate going into 2024. Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.